Yes. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Let's close in prayer. I started strong. No, just kidding. Oye, como va? That makes me, I have to say that after I hear that music. So anyway, delighted you're here, and welcome. I'm Wolfgang, if we haven't met yet, and thanks for coming. One of the things that I love, of the many things that I love so much about living in the Pacific Northwest, and we sometimes we take this for granted. We have, within a 2-hour drive of us right now, more or less, 3 of the world's greatest national parks. Just like here we're sitting, and it's like just down the street, you know what I mean? Like you've got the Olympics, of course, across the sound, you've got a Rainier down to the south, and of course the lesser known but just as spectacular North Cascades National Park, which is just amazing. And whether you're the kind of person who enjoys driving into the parks and kind of parking at the overlooks and taking in the views from there, or you're one that prefers to backcountry it and do some hiking or some exploring or whatever, they're amazing either way. But not everybody feels that way. And several years ago, a woman named Amber Scher, she published a book called Subpar Parks. Have you heard of this? America's Most Extraordinary National Parks and Their Least Impressed Visitors. And so what she did is she combed through the internet to find 1-star reviews of the national park. Absolutely all authentic. For example, anybody been to Bryce Canyon in Utah? Have you guys visited that? You've been there? Amazing place. Here's what one person thought: too orange, too spiky. 1 star. Or the Great Yosemite, one of the most magical places I've ever been. Trees block the view and there are too many gray rocks, was their impression. Some tough judging here. Joshua Tree in California, I'd like to go there. The one thing to do here is walk around the desert. That's all there is. That's kind of what national parks are for, right? There are dozens of these. There's a whole book. I have it in my office. It's amazing, hilarious, but a couple of other favorites. Grand Canyon, a hole, a very, very large hole. Genuine review. And then finally, Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii didn't even get to touch lava. Which kind of sounds like the rangers doing their job, actually, as you think about it. People can be pretty tough critics. And it's not just national parks, it's restaurants, it's companies, it's products, it's movies, it's churches, which is sort of ironic on survey day, right? I recently heard David Kinnaman. He's the president of a Christian research company called Barna Research. They do amazing work, kind of surveying spiritual trends and looking at church impact and so forth. And he gathered some 1-star reviews that they've heard as they've been asking for feedback on churches. For example, someone commented, 1 star, church, I just go for the music, the rest annoys me. Which maybe that's people here at North Shore, I don't know. Or this one, 1 star, it's outdated and somewhat judgmental, was the thought. Others responded, the members from my church are superficial and closed off, 1 star. Hopefully this one wasn't from North Shore, check this out. The pastor is cold and acts like a dictator. People, let's get honest now, right? And then this last one, this is an absolutely authentic response, maybe my favorite. The church meets at my house and I don't want people over. All right, now, let's just say it. You gotta be judging pretty tight to 1-star Yosemite, am I right? But it is not difficult for most of us to think of some 1-star reviews for our church experiences. Frankly, maybe even here. And honestly, most of us could write those kind of reviews. And I stand here before you, telling you just directly, I know what it's like to be betrayed by church people I thought I could trust. 1 star. To be gossiped about and lied about. I've seen ministry friends and former colleagues who have gone off the rails in some deeply disturbing ways. Breaks my heart. I've had people who I looked up to as spiritual heroes. I mean, people whose books and messages and ministries were ones I longed to emulate and learn from, who it turned out were one person publicly, but another person behind closed doors. There's way too many of those stories. Maybe you've experienced some of that too. And of course, I know there are others who've experienced even worse, maybe even in this room or joining us online. Maybe you were abused. You know, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and that was one of the regions where studies and investigations were released that documented the widespread abuse of kids and vulnerable adults that went almost unchecked in certain places. Some of the victims in those reports are people I know personally. And of course, to be clear, this isn't limited to one tradition, or certainly not to one region. I know far too many stories of people who have been manipulated, exploited, abused by people they trusted to be spiritual leaders in their lives. Sometimes Christians get it wrong. Sometimes really, really wrong. And I know even as I kind of walk into this is a really tender subject for some folks, and yet we've got to talk about it a little bit. Because it's what we've been talking about in this series, the reality that sometimes Christians get it wrong. And as Jesus begins to bring to a close this famous Sermon on the Mount, these 3 chapters in the book of Matthew that we've been studying verse by verse by verse for this entire year, looking closely at this vision that Jesus casts for what it looks like to live life his way and to embody his kingdom in this world, this very countercultural way of life. He says, watch out. Be on guard. Jesus says, I'm not the only one who's going to come to you with a way of life to pitch. There will be others. And maybe they'll claim to have a better way, or they'll have a different truth, or they'll try to take little pieces of what I've said and try to twist them and use them for their own benefit, or maybe just completely outright ignore other parts of what I talked about. Watch out. Let's just look at specifically what he says. If you have a Bible, you can follow along, open the app, or look at the screen. Matthew 7, starting in verse 15. Jesus says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. See, in our world with so many voices, so many perspectives and worldviews, and some saying this is the way to the good life, some saying that is the way to the good life, it can be confusing. Who do I look to? Who can I trust? And as we talked about last week, sort of contrary to this overused cliche, all paths do not lead up the same mountain. It's a very shallow way to look at it. When you dig in, you discover how fundamentally different these different paths are. And if you weren't with us last week, Scotty did a brilliant job unpacking those challenging passages. And I hope you'll do yourself a favor and listen to that message if you haven't yet. So Jesus warns, there are false prophets out there. The Greek, the original language this text is written in, pseudo-propheton. You hear it. Like pseudonym, false name, pseudo, false, fake, propheton, prophet. Jesus says there's posers out there. Some of them are smooth, but be careful. Watch out. People who claim to be speaking for God or promoting truth, but actually are not. And so right along with blessed are the poor in spirit and turn the other cheek, and here's how to pray. Here in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, be careful. Watch out. You're going to run across some fakers out there. You got to be ready. And of course, this wasn't just a warning from Jesus in his famous Sermon on the Mount. The Old Testament, God repeatedly warns his people against fakers who come in all kinds of forms. In the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, chapter 13, it says, if a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us follow another god or other gods you have not known, let us worship them. You must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. Don't be fooled. Even if they can do impressive stuff, don't be fooled, he says. Or later, through the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 14 of his book, it says, then the Lord said to me, speaking to Jeremiah, The prophets are prophesying lies in my name. Jeremiah being an authentic prophet. God says others are posers. I have not sent them or appointed them or spoken to them. They are prophesying to you false visions, divinations, idolatries, and the delusions of their own minds. Don't be fooled. Even if it's impressive, even if they're convincing, even if they seem so nice or confident, watch out. And of course, the same was said after Jesus. In fact, almost every single one of the New Testament writers warns people about this. Paul, writing to his young protege Timothy, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, he says this, "For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine," or teaching is the other word for that, translation. "Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear." How good is that image? Find the people who tell me what I want to hear. The stuff I want to get away with, I'm looking for some folks who will tell me, no, it's actually okay. You misread that verse. It didn't really mean that. Paul says, look out for folks like that. You're going to find them. They're easy to find, but look out. Look what they do. They will turn their ears away from truth and turn aside to myths. But you, Timothy, keep your head in all situations. Or again, over in 2 Peter chapter 2, he says, there were also false prophets among the people, speaking back in the days of Moses and Jeremiah and so on, as we just saw, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with fabricated stories. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping. That's some harsh stuff. Peter's writing not just about what used to happen, but what's still happening and what will continue to happen. And then finally, John, in 1 John chapter 4, he says, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. I could go on and on and on with examples of these warnings. The point is this: not everyone who comes with inspiring words or who seems nice is worth following or listening to. Jesus says this is a big deal. This is not a minor issue. They're ferocious wolves, he says. Watch out. And that's what makes this even trickier, he says, because these false prophets are not nearly as easy to spot as you would hope they would be. Second half again of Matthew 7, verse 15, Jesus says, they come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are what? Wolves. This metaphor of a sheep in wolf's clothing, that's actually common back in Jesus' day. It was originally cooked up by, remember Aesop's fables? That's where it shows up first. Those were written 500 years before Jesus. And so Jesus draws from this kind of pulp culture image that people would know, these stories in their society. And even today, the wolf is kind of a representative of what is, a predator, right? One who's not safe, one who's out for blood, who is dangerous. So Jesus picks up this language and says, watch out for wolves, but just be aware, the wolves, at least the smart wolves, sometimes they look like sheep. And in the same way, false prophets don't always look like false prophets. They don't just look on the face like heretics or Satanists or whatever else. Sometimes they sound a lot like followers of Jesus. Meaning you can't take people at face value, especially those who claim to speak on behalf of God. And let me just acknowledge, the irony of a pastor saying that from stage is thick, okay? I have felt the burden of this text for a couple weeks as I was preaching it. I'm so aware of that right now. And yet this raises such an important question, we have to talk about it. How do you tell a true prophet from a false one? Well, Jesus has a couple of tests he suggests. Test number one, the life test. The life test. Look again at what he says in verse 16. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Rhetorical question. Answer, no. Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. And Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, right? It's a kind of a tongue tie there, so I'm sorry about that. No, Jesus says, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit. A bad tree cannot bear good fruit. And every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And of course, what he means by fruit, that metaphor, is what comes out of your life, our character. I love Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of this same text in a translation or paraphrase known as the Message translation. He just sort of updates it. Same words, just a fresh take. Here's what he writes. Be wary of false preachers who smile a lot, dripping with practiced sincerity. Chances are they're out to rip you off some way or other. Don't be impressed with charisma. Look for character. Who preachers are is the main thing, not what they say. A genuine leader will never exploit your emotions or your pocketbook. These diseased trees with their bad apples are going to be chopped down and burned. How good is that? It's not about charisma. It's about character. It's the life test. What are they like off stage? What are they like when their staff only sees them? Behind the scenes, when the mic's not recording and the cameras are off. Look at their marriage. Look at their sexuality. Look at their family. Look at their kids. Look at how they steward money and power. Are they humble? Are they always self-promoting? Are they in community? Are they lone rangers? Are they under the authority of a local church or with all the messiness and challenge that comes with that? Or have they just kind of abandoned that and decided to go on their own and freelance? Just no accountability, just rogue. Look at how they live. This is what Jesus means by fruit. And of course, his early followers knew exactly what he meant. These people all did this stuff. These were agricultural folks. Vines make grapes. Everybody knows that. Figs make figs. This is not rocket science. Thorns and thistles make more thorns and thistles. And in the same way, good people produce good fruit. Not perfect fruit, but good fruit. And bad people, not so much. So test one, take a close look at their life and their character. But of course, test one by itself is not enough to spot a false prophet. Because what do you mean by good? Right? And this is really tricky for us in the Pacific Northwest. Because when we think of good, we think of things like loving. It's a wonderful word, but what we mean by loving, generally speaking, for the most part, is are they nice, are they tolerant, and are they generally happy rather than grumpy? Right? Are they nice, tolerant, and happy? Doesn't really matter what they say. It's just so easy to kind of import our own cultural definition of good, this nice, tolerant, happy thing, into the text and say, well, it doesn't matter what they say, or whether it aligns with the Bible or whether it's even a little heretical, right? They seem like a nice person. They seem so confident. They seem good. They're nice, tolerant, happy. What's the big deal? So just let it slide or even go along with it. See, what we need is an anchor point for our definition of good and evil. An anchor point we can hold on to. And this is part of why our society is in such a crisis right now. Nobody can agree exactly what is that anchor point. What is good and what is bad? What is right and what is wrong? What is beautiful and what is awful or destructive? There are all these worldviews. And that's a beautiful thing about living in a unique culture like we do. But the key issue is figuring out what's that anchor point going to be. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, of which I'm unapologetically one, we need that anchor point. And that anchor point is Jesus himself. It's Jesus himself, his teaching as preserved in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then interpreted through the writings of the New Testament. He is our anchor point, friends. No individual personality or person or leader, only Jesus. That's what leads us to the second test. This I call the teaching test. The teaching test. The life test isn't enough. It's not enough for them to just be nice or charismatic or confident. Definitely not enough for them to just use some Christian language. You got to look really carefully at the content of what it is they're actually teaching. And there are times when this is pretty easy because it's pretty obvious. And there are well-known but tragic stories many of you may know, of things like Jim Jones in South America in the late 1970s, or David Koresh in Waco, Texas in the late 1990s. If you're not familiar with those stories, look them up. They'll give you nightmares. There are other examples, like a guy named Edgar Whisenant, who published this book. It's called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. He sold 4.5 million copies of this. And even after none of his predictions came true, he carried on in ministry, published several more books. One predicting the end of the world in 1989, another predicting the end of the world in 1993, and finally in 1994. And in case you were wondering, it didn't happen. Okay, for those who are like, wait a second, I don't remember that. It's because it didn't happen, okay? But it's not typically that obvious. So it reminds me of Paul's other words to Timothy, one spiritual leader to another. And the context is all about false prophets and false teachers. And he writes this to Timothy, who's not a false prophet. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, Paul writes, watch your life and doctrine, Timothy. And doctrine, again, that Greek word for doctrine could also be teaching. It could be translated either way. Watch your life and doctrine or teaching closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. Notice, watch your life and teaching. Your teaching and your life. And you notice what's at stake there? Salvation itself. So a great diagnostic question to ask when you have that podcast in your ear or that book in your hand or you're listening to me or whoever it is. If you're wondering, is this person on or off or somewhere in the middle? A great diagnostic question is this. Is this person's teaching moving my heart to obey Jesus' teachings? Do they make me want to do the will of the Father, as laid out in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as embodied by Jesus himself? Or do they make me doubt? Or do they seem to play kind of fast and loose with interpretation, seemingly trying to justify certain behaviors they'd like to justify? To explain things away, to kind of be able to do whatever they want. That's the key. This is where we got to be rooted, not only in the Bible, but especially in the life and teachings of Jesus and the New Testament. One of those New Testament books, the book of Acts, describes what it was like for those early Christians, and it describes a scene where the Apostle Paul is preaching in a town called Berea. And these people are listening to Paul preach, and here's what it says, Acts 17. They received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. These guys are double checking the Apostle Paul, who wound up writing most of the New Testament. And if that's true for Paul, it should be 10 times true for yours truly. It ought to be 20 times for Scotty. He's from Arkansas, guys, Arkansas. And he's preaching up at Mill Creek this Sunday, so I can say that. We're not recording this, of course. Honestly, on any given occasion, let's put it this way. Let's be optimistic. Let's say 90% of what we say up here is right on. My number might be lower. But just for the sake of my ego, let's work with 90%, okay? Maybe 10% is going to be off. Not like full-on heretical off, but maybe poorly communicated or confusing or poorly balanced or anything like that. Problem is, I don't know which 10%, neither do you. It's not like I'm sitting there writing my message on Tuesday morning thinking, where should I put the heresy this week? You know, like, I think point 2, that's a good place. That seems like a good place for heresy. I tell you, before God, I am doing my best up here, okay? But I'm a human being with a mind that is fallen and a mind that is filled with the Holy Spirit. Both of those things. Both are true of me. But you still have to test everything any of us say, anything Scotty says, anything anybody here says, against that litmus test of Scripture, and particularly the teachings of Jesus and the New Testament. We should be so well-versed and so familiar, so immersed in the mind and imagination of Jesus and his way of life that when somebody's off, we can spot it a mile away. And I don't mean like in some arrogant or angry thing, because friends, don't misunderstand me. I know people who have the teaching test right on, but the life test way off. I mean, they can argue doctrine out the wazoo. They got it all right, but there's There's an arrogance and a self-superiority and a self-righteousness that is equally incongruent with Jesus. Life and teaching. Teaching and life. So well rooted in that we just know when we hear something that's out of line, we just realize, no. Actually, Jesus said this. Actually, no, Jesus said this. Actually, Jesus said this. To pick that stuff up. I know somebody, for instance, in this series who's been every single day as we've been studying the Sermon on the Mount, they read those 3 chapters in Matthew, 5, 6, and 7, where the Sermon on the Mount is found. 5, 6, and every single day. It's gonna be hard to pull the wool over that person's eyes because they're rooting themselves in Jesus' word, anchored there. Jesus says, watch out, the life test and the teaching test. Be on guard. Now, I'm almost out of time and it may go over a little over. I'll go quick here. I'm excited too. Because this is all great going forward. Like it's great preemptive stuff. But let's just acknowledge there are those here today who've been impacted by people who in hindsight would not have passed either the teaching or the life test. Their sheep costume fooled you. It's happened to me too. But as wolves, they left deep wounds that you may still carry. Oh my goodness, have we seen too much of this in our own region, friends? And maybe for you, it's even hard to be in a place like this. It's hard to trust again. Maybe you've even given up or you're just watching online because you're not sure you ever want to set foot in a place like this. I don't blame you. Honestly, hearing stories, I know some people who, if I'd experienced what they experienced, I'm not sure I'd be hanging around. I'd certainly be holding things at arm's length. It's one of the things that has been such a beautiful piece of who North Shore has been for its 50 plus years. People have come to this church and found a place where maybe they were wounded elsewhere, but they could begin to heal and recover. I'll tell you, that's part of my story. When I came here 14 years ago this month, hurting, God used this place to heal me. But I also acknowledge there are those who have been hurt here. People who let you down. They didn't say hi in the lobby, or they bothered you by something they said, or didn't return your call, or didn't return that email when you reached out in crisis, or didn't respond the way that you were hoping they would to some issue in your life. I won't make excuses. I mean this sincerely. I am so sorry. I know it happens. I know it has happened. Even the best of us, there are times when we drop the ball. And we're always trying to get better. We can always get better. Sometimes we get it wrong. And whether it was here or whether it was somewhere else, I couldn't mean this anymore. I am so sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. And remember, keep in mind, it's not just the leaders. Yes, Scripture says those who teach and lead will be held to a higher standard. Friends, I am so sober-minded about that. This is a dangerous job. I'm just telling you. Every follower of Jesus is called to authentically live and hold to the way of Jesus. It's not just the leaders who get it wrong. So much harm can be done by followers of Jesus who claim to believe one thing but act very different. Honestly, let's just be honest. There's a lot of people I will never come in contact. They'll never hear a talk like this. We'll never meet, but you work with them and you live by them and you go to school with them. And you have this same opportunity to either be an accurate reflection of the true Jesus of Scripture or a deformed one. This isn't about keep your eyes on the leader. It's also take a look in the mirror. Are you living out what you say you believe? That's actually where Jesus goes next in the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll be talking about that next week. Because sometimes we all get it wrong. But even when we get it wrong, I can assure you there is one who never will, and that one is named Jesus. He will never get it wrong. A few years ago, another of my spiritual influences, it was just a gut punch when this one hit, discovered he was living a double life. And I remember a friend talking about this. We were both grieving together. And I remember he said this. He said, I'm running out of people I want to be like. I'm running out of people I want to be like. And I get that. So one of my sort of personal ambitions or goals, some of you heard me said this before, it's to have those who know me best respect me most. Because have you ever had those people you've respected from afar, and then you got to know them, and you wish you hadn't? I don't want to be one of those people. God, please. But even in my best times, I still fall short. I know I fall short. But there is one who never does. And there's nothing wrong with having people to look at as examples or inspirations. But remember, there is only one whose example is truly worth following top to bottom. And friends, that is Jesus himself. That's why this place isn't about a person. It isn't about a denomination. It isn't about a tradition. It's about Jesus. That's what this is all about. So I am sorry if others have hurt you, have failed you in some really bad ways. I beg you, don't confuse the failures of Jesus' followers with Jesus himself. And one way or another, we all let each other down, sometimes in bad ways. Jesus never will. And Jesus can heal those wounds, even those kinds of wounds, through his touch, through his spirit, sometimes even through his church. You know, I mentioned those 1-star church reviews that are easy to find out there. The beautiful truth is there are lots of 5-star reviews as well. And here's one of them. This is an actual review. People who were broken and wounded, found healing and renewal, who left this response: "The church put my heart back together." That's a real comment. And whatever you've been through, can I tell you, that can happen for you. And maybe today can be the beginning of that. So here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to just close your eyes with me for a second, because I want to create a little space here as we finish for you to come to him, to ask him maybe to replace that hurt with his healing. Maybe there are faces and names that come to your mind. They do for me. I'll tell you what, how many faces came to my mind prepping this talk? Frankly, people who hurt me and who I've done the hurting. And yet even those things, God can heal, he can forgive. So right now, maybe you want to ask him, replace that pain with his purpose. Ask him to replace that hatred with his hope. Ask him to take our wounds and replace them with worship. God, you are a healer. You rebuild and restore, you resurrect. And I pray you'll do a little resurrecting right now. Even in these places of pain, even there is none like you. I worship you as the one who will never fail us. Jesus. Please heal. Please heal. I want to ask the prayer team if you guys would quickly get in position, because maybe there's folks here who just want to ask for God to heal. You don't have to go into detail. You can just say, I need healing, and they want to pray over you. But don't miss this chance, asking God to replace those wounds with his worship. Would you stand with me if you're able? And let's worship this God who heals. Please heal, God. Please heal.